I didn't think I would tell so much about who I am, but more what I have learned about my father and things that happened after the war. And I thought I'd first talk a little bit about the background of the camps, and then it was so interesting to read diaries and reports from that time, so I thought I'd read some and then show pictures at the end. The work camps in Lapland, 46 to 48, were an initiative of the American Friends Service Committee, but largely through the personal efforts of Douglas Steer. And I can only speak from the Quaker perspective and not the settlement movement, but we'll hear more about that. Why this relief and peace work? Well, Quakerism arose at the time of civil war in England as people who felt moved by a spirit which takes away the occasion of war. And as this famous quote by George Fox, "I told them I lived in the virtue of that life and power that took away the occasion of all wars. I told them I was coming to the covenant of peace, which was before wars and strifes were." And part of this had to do with the idea of there being that of God in everyone. If there's something of God in everyone, this leads to pacifism if you take it seriously, since killing another person would be killing something of God. And it also places responsibility or emphasis on spirituality as intimately connected with human relations and not just a personal relationship with God. And since Quakers were rather uninterested in the life hereafter, doing things in this life became all that more important. In any case, the work camps in Finland after the war were good examples of attempts in a long history of Quaker efforts to promote peace in Finland, and peace and justice. A few words about Douglas Steer. Often such things as these work camps in Finland depend on the efforts of individuals. And in this case, much depended on Douglas Steer. He was not a Quaker by birth. He was born in Michigan in 1901, died in 1995. His father was a postal worker. Douglas went to college, wanted to help the world, and had been told that the great need in the world would be for more food production to feed the growing world population. So he got a degree in agriculture, wrote about the possibilities and potential of the potato, and began teaching high school, coached the football team, and then decided that this might not be his ultimate calling. And he got a Rhodes Scholarship and went to Oxford and got a PhD in Harvard in philosophy and special interest in mystical religion. He began teaching at Haverford College, a Quaker college, already in 1928, and joined the Society of Friends, became very involved in peace and service work and the American Friends Service Committee, and also in getting Quakers more involved in ecumenical efforts and bridging between Quakers and Catholicism and Buddhism. So he liked to build bridges. That was his big interest in a way. He also wrote many books on the inner life and also on work, the relationship between work and contemplation. This is a short brochure that was read during the work camps after the war called Work and Contemplation. And he also had a longer book about that subject. And so the work camps were good examples of what he saw as how to mix religion and what needed to be done. He was a popular teacher at Haverford College, and as the situation in Europe moved toward war, quite a few students found in Douglas and his wife Dorothy someone who could give guidance and support. He also was involved in starting Pendle Hill, which became a model for Vita Kiwi later. And he worked for trying to unite various Quaker branches. He also started a master's degree program in relief work for post-war work. So he did a lot of things. My father, Howard Lutz, was one of Douglas's students at Haverford College. And I'm making this a rather personal account of the work camps, but we'll get to the work camps soon. But he was then drafted during the war and had taken classes with Douglas and become a convinced pacifist and Quaker. So he ended up becoming a conscientious objector. My grandfather had been one of those Haverford students who saw Haverford as a place to get a good start in life and a career. He had graduated in 1909 and gone on from Haverford to become a wealthy lawyer after serving in the army in World War I. He was a proud veteran, and not only that, he was a member of the local draft board, which had to approve conscientious objectors. So when my father applied for conscientious objection as the US entered World War II, it was a severe blow to my grandfather and a shameful thing for the whole family, and in the view of most Americans, really. Haverford was a Quaker school, but you were not supposed to take Quakerism seriously. Then during the war, my father was in work camps as a conscientious objector with lumberjack work camps, a bit like the ones you saw here in Finland, sent to work digging ditches, things like that. And he wrote in a diary the whole time. And I found thousands of pages, and I'm not going to read them all, but here are a few things from his time in 1942. Apparently, men who go into the Coast Guard are called draft dodgers by the natives here, so we know where we stand. All day I have felt under the weight of this idea that the community resents us. But so far, the community has no faces or names for me, and I long for the chance to get to know some of them personally. He also thought you had an extra moral obligation to prove yourself as a conscientious objector if you were not willing to fight. So he writes, but I think COs ought to behave differently when they realize that we are not suffering with those in the armed forces who act for just as sincere and conscientious a motive as ours is. And moved by Douglas Steere and his mystical religion courses and all that, he spent a lot of time out walking. After supper, I walked down the road a piece and then across the fields to a small graveyard on a small rise. After examining the stones in the graveyard and reading some of the verses, I spent quite a time on my knees, as I felt much in need. It was a lovely, quiet time there. The sky was deep blue and growing darker. The few clouds had still a faint tinge of color from the sunset. The fields were of a red-brown color, and the frame farmhouses with their plumes of slowly rising smoke contributed to a scene of complete serenity. The Lord was indeed present in the beauty and peacefulness of the outer world, and in the inner, grateful, I came away much helped. And he writes quite a lot about things like that. But then one day, Douglas Steere came to visit in the camp, and he writes, good day on the project. We chopped trees. When I got back to camp and washed, I found Douglas Steere, who had just arrived for a visit of 5 days with us. Helped him get his bed made and talked with him and Leonard Kenworthy till supper. He gave me a Swedish Nya Testamentet, in other words, the New Testament, saying that I should do well to get started on it, for it was the key to Finland. I was grateful to him for it, and it has led to interesting speculation on what might be open in the years to come. If it is significant or not, time will tell. So,
excuse
yes.
me. Are you supposing that there is a slideshow?
No, it's coming. My father then spent a couple of years learning Swedish and was sent to Inari. So it didn't help him much. Anyway, after this experience, he was in starvation experiment, different things during the war. Douglas Steer, the connection with Finland came through a visit he made to Stockholm to visit Swedish friends, and a young Finn, Ingmar Rikberg, dragged him to Finland and said, "You have to come." This was in December of 1940, and the Karelian evacuation had already been, and things Quakers were working on with the refugees. And Douglas had a concern after this and worked hard to convince the AFSC after the war to arrange some work. And I have lots of papers from Douglas about this. But he realized also that you need a partner organization in the country, which is quite a modern view, also in third world work and so on. You all should have a partner in the country. And he found the settlement movement, which was perfect partner for this. So that's, he was very happy about that. Anyway, so Douglas had said that he should go, my father should go to Finland and lead work camps, but that Finnish is impossible to learn. It's a bilingual country, so you could learn Swedish and get along. But he had only been to Helsinki. So it didn't work out. So my father ended up in Inari, and he heard one of the local, he had to start learning Finnish right away, of course. And he heard one of the local people asking the other one, does he speak Finnish? And the other one said, like a horse. Niin kuin hevonen. So he took that as a compliment. And he learned quite good Finnish, but better Swedish during these times. In the camps, doing the work, the practical work of building and so on, that was just a part of it. Getting along with the camp, with all these different people from different places, that was quite a thing too. You had the different languages, different nationalities, culture clashes, maybe with the local area, who was rural area, and maybe young people from urban areas. Differences in education and habits, lack of specific training. And these were young people who were trying to build houses, who had never built anything before, many. And luckily, they could find local people who could help work with them and teach them how to do things. But it was quite a thing. Also, they had trouble one year because the truck could not get through, and they needed sand for a concrete foundation. And there was only one horse in the area, and that was the border patrols in Hirvasvaara, I guess. And then the border patrol moved, so they lost their horse, and it was very difficult. For all that, they did quite well, and the work camps led to many permanent changes in people's lives, marriage, career changes. For my father, it meant being an interest in Scandinavia. He was not Scandinavian at all in background, and he became a teacher of Scandinavian history. And others did all kinds of interesting things. Actually, if you look at the weekly reports from the camps, you see that the AFSC expected a lot. They expected there to be a report on the work, on educational programs, on the silent meetings and how they were going, and so on. So I'll just read a little bit, excerpts, and then I'll spend about the last part of my time showing pictures. This is from Hirvasvaara. It was especially interesting to me to see the Finnish methods of building, which are determined largely by the need to insulate the houses against the cold in winter. One of our houses was of logs, and it was a real thrill to work on this house and learn the art of fitting logs. But much of the work was unexciting and consisted mostly of carrying stones and bricks and mixing mortar. Here I came to have immense respect for the work capacities of the Finns, especially the women. One recalls the remarks Kivi makes in Seven Brothers about Finnish womanhood, but it is something else to find that these women can carry more and faster than one can oneself. The necessity of communication with the Finnish carpenters who supervised our work was one of the best stimuli for learning Finnish that I had, and perhaps no one responded more warmly to my feeble attempts than these men, most of whom had come from Lapua parish, the center of Finnish pietism. For me, the relationship with them was one of the rich things in the work project, and it confirmed the belief in the value of common physical work as a bridge between people who cannot share much by word of mouth. It's hard to say much about the significance of what we did at Hirvasvaara after so short a time. I think that besides our actual work contribution, our best help was our friendliness. Yet it is not right to say that this was a contribution, since I think we found as much or more of friendliness than we brought. But if we brought something fresh with us that made it possible for this mutual relationship to grow, then we made a contribution. I think we did. Many of the people are ridden with a sense of insecurity and are suffering from rumors of another war and a third evacuation. This makes it very hard for them to settle down psychologically to the task of normal and peacetime living. Particularly among the veterans, this seems to be true. One of the strongest cementing forces in the way of whole group activities was our singing together. The Finns are equipped with the most wonderful collection of songs, which they know well and can sing many verses. If Americans are sent to Finland work camps again, I would recommend their learning beforehand the words to 4 or 5 of the most common Finnish songs, as well as the original words of any German or French songs they may know. Singing was a common way of joining into community activities, and we sang on nearly all occasions. My experience with my flute leads me to believe that musical instruments, particularly of the portable sort, are well worth the space they may take up in the baggage. One instance in which singing together was connected with an experience of deep sharing, much like that of our silent meetings at the beginning of each day, occurred when a group of us gathered one evening in the barracks and sang Finnish hymns and songs with periods of quiet in between. And there's no clock here, so I check my time. I have 2 more minutes and then I'll show pictures. This is about how sometimes you can't lead faster than people are ready to move. After a meal, we sat and talked and dried ourselves before the fire. I had a talk with Bill Fredrickson, who was feeling a bit discouraged with the effects of his educational program in the camp. I felt that perhaps the camp had had so strong leadership with both Bill and Esko Elvisari that they had gone galloping on without noting whether the group followed. We, on the other hand, were weaker and always under the weight of intellectual apathy, so that we were always aware of how little progress was being made. And I wonder if Mary's method here was not the better. And so to bed in the tent, tired, damp, and rather dirty. And then a little bit about the Quaker gatherings. Silent meetings have been held regularly every morning, averaging 20 minutes in length. these have been all silent. A number of campers have had difficulty staying awake. And one Finn remarked that he enjoyed this unprogrammed type of service since it did not disturb his slumbers. This satisfaction with our meetings is not shared by all. Anyway, we have our problems, often difficult ones, but we are steadily moving toward a vital group life, and very gradually we are uncovering in one another new stores of richness we had not seen earlier. No one has lost his sense of humor. No one seems unwilling to do more than his share of the work, and singing is an important part of our life. Maybe just a short one from the end here. Spiritually, we are approaching unity, but there are certain members of the group who seem further from the center than others, and yet one's own personal perspective determines this rather much. We still count ourselves very fortunate to have so many good people in the camp, and yet must guard against a surface comfortableness and mutual enjoyment that obscures the deeper reason for our being here, and that makes a work camp something more than a labor camp with good recreational resources. So there's much more about going to sauna and things, but I'll put on my picture. I don't have I don't have much in the way of information about all these pictures, so I'll just show them and we'll take a little look. Douglas Deere was recognized by the Finnish government in '87 for the work. It's a picture of him there. Here's Douglas as a younger man. Here's with Heikki Vaaris, who was in the settlement, his partner in the settlement movement, the Suomen Huolto, and later the rector of the university in Helsinki. Douglas Deere and his wife Dorothy, and many people don't remember that Dorothy was at least as much a supportive figure for many as Douglas. This was Radnor Meeting, which was the place where my father learned to know Quakers through Douglas, and a meeting that was restarted by Douglas around Philadelphia. My father as a young man, we could turn off the light maybe. Is that, are these the lights? Serious young man. This is from the starvation experiment he was in for a year. You can see they lost a third of their body weight, and the picture to the right are people first before and then during the starvation, and then when they tried to rehabilitate them afterwards. Here's a picture of my father's heart, the size it was in the beginning and then after starvation. He later died of a heart attack, actually, so never know what happened. Here he's on his way to Finland with his Swedish Bible. During the winters, when you couldn't work in Lapland, he taught school at Vigbyholm School, on a Swedish school started by Quakers, and his students made a drawing of him and thanked him. And here he is later. But these work camps for 46 to 48, this brochure about how it's the need for this from the American Friends Service Committee. Lapland, 46. And you can't maybe, you see that? Okay. Lapland needs your help. These are the camps that my father, I mean, there were many more camps, so my whole story is rather personal, and that's all I know. So someone else could maybe give a better picture. But my father was first, we are now in Rovaniemi, my father was in Hirvasvaara, and then later in Innari and Lieksa, different years, 46, 47, 48. Innari is 300 kilometers north of here. For you foreigners, you think you're far north now. Hirvasvaara, 1946. Beautiful nature. Here you can see the house was burned down by the Germans. Just a chimney, but there's the well still that they're using. A family with 8 children living in one room. And then some of the work camp groupers. My father with the hat in the front, but maybe some of... I was thinking with Jorma yesterday, trying to think of who some of the others might be. This is the horse that they could borrow from the border patrol. My father carrying boards, working building. He had actually done construction work earlier, but not in the Finnish way. A work camper. And this is Sade Turunen, her name was Aho, I think then, from Turku, and I think Mary, the leader of the camp with Howard. Pouring the foundations. This is the picture I think that's in the newspaper today. And I sent some to the... And here you see piles of lumber. And here you see houses. And there was such a lot of destruction. Was it over 80% of the buildings were destroyed by the Germans retreating through Lapland. They lived in tents, very simple. Annika was telling me yesterday about how some of the Swedish ones who are still alive today said that maybe they never had such a good time and they never had lived so terribly, or whatever you'd say. And activities, I don't know what. They had lots of meetings. That's the way with Quakers always, lots of meetings. Different kinds. Work meetings, silent meeting every morning, and quite often just maybe in the woods. Then there was a lot of work done with children. That was part of the program, was to involve children, to feed children, work with children. Here you see them feeding, very simple food often. And there were nurses, some of them were nurses, and especially up in Inari in the north, when people found out somebody was a nurse, people started coming from all over to be looked at, and it was tricky to know when they should be sent far away to see a real doctor. I like to imagine that she's telling a story, but I don't know. Lots of dancing. And then the picture of children playing with these silhouettes against the sky, sort of monsters in the background. Even with the ball. Midsummer gathering of the whole area. I think that's Heikki Vaaris. Getting in the car. Lying around, relaxing, playing games. I think perhaps volleyball with just a rope. Off to hay time with their rakes, cutting the hay. And Inari is up in the far north, and I'll keep this very brief. Small town on the big lake. Of course, real Lapland. And my father was back during the winter sometimes. I think maybe took this then. And again, now you see over the water that was totally destroyed, the bridge. Families needing places to live. And living in tents, making their own lumber, I think, out of the trees. They had some kind of a sawmill that they managed to work. This is Lulu Rauha, many of you may know, sitting on next, and my father, both of them, who led the camp there. Lots of work.
Can you put the other one back, please?
This one?
Not the next one. Not the next one. That one. There is Johanna Saresvuo.
Okay.
Quaker lady from Tampere.
Which one?
The one on the right from me.
Okay.
With the spectacles.
Yes.
Yeah, with the spectacles.
And apparently waiting in line for haircuts and reading. Building, building, building. A lot of these are in an album which is in the other room here, so you can look at them later. Real characters, local people, with skills and energy, drilling by hand through logs. So I'm going to have to stop now. One last picture, and that is this. Simple pleasures, just a board and a log and a Finnish boy, hopefully hopping. Thank you.